Welcome, everyone. This is, of course, LitLive Online. My name is Ben Robinson, and I'm the host of this reading series. We'd like to thank all of our readers for joining us, as well as everyone in the audience tonight. LitLive Online is a free event and will remain so for the foreseeable future. LitLive is funded by the Ontario Arts Council and the Canada Council for the Arts, and we're very grateful for all of that support. I would also encourage our writers tonight, please post a link to be able to buy your book in the chat and also in our Facebook group. It's a little harder for us to help you sell books online, but we'd like to do as much as we can, so don't be shy about that. Technical management, as you may have already seen, will be handled by Gary Barwin tonight. So if you have any questions, you can throw them his way. And I'd like to begin tonight by recognizing and acknowledging that this reading series is hosted in Hamilton, Ontario, and our events are part of the cultural life of a city built on the traditional territories of the Mississauga, the Haudenosaunee, the Erie, the Neutral, and the Huron-Wendat, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement and the Between the Lakes Treaties. In this particular moment, I want to acknowledge the struggle of the Haudenosaunee people to assert their treaty rights at 1492 Landback Lane, as they've been there for 532 days and nights. This evening, we are going to have 6 readers. We will have 2 sets, so we're going to start things off with David Lee, Carol Steski, and Ralph Benmergui, and we'll have a short intermission. And after that, we'll come back with a recording from the poet Roxanna Bennett, followed by Michael Melgaard and Alice Burdick. Time permitting, we will end the night off with a short Q&A. So if you have any questions for our readers tonight, please save them for our discussion and we'll get to those at the end. If you have any technical issues tonight, feel free to reach out in the chat, either to one of the committee members directly or just to people generally. We're all pretty familiar with how this works now, so we can help each other out. Gary will look after any meeting-wide modifications that might be necessary tonight. And please note that during the reading, audience microphones will be muted. Our first reader tonight is David Lee. David Neil Lee's latest book, The Medusa Deep, has made the CBC list of best books of 2021 in the young adult category. A dark science fiction saga in which H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos erupts from the Ticats home stadium in Hamilton's East End. And it's the sequel to The Midnight Games, which won the 2016 Hamilton Literary Award for the book that best conveys the spirit of Hamilton. This year, David intends to finish the Midnight Games trilogy and will oversee an Italian translation of his book Stopping Time, Paul Bley and the Transformation of Jazz. His other books include The Battle of the Five Spot, the best-selling Chainsaws, A History, and the novel Commander Zero. David has lived with his family in Hamilton since 2002. Please welcome to LitLive, David Lee.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ben. Now, if you can't hear me, do up an alarm or something, but I think we're good. Now, I'm got a little bit of an editorial I need to start off with tonight. So let's see. So nice to be back here doing this reading. I wish we could do it in person, but it's just not the time to do that yet. Anyway, thank you all for logging on. And by all means, as Ben said, you can order these books online. But when people ask me that sometimes, they say, hey, is your book on Amazon? I always say, yeah, I guess, but please go to your local independent bookstore first. So if you want any of the books you hear about tonight, please check out your local bookseller. They're not only a source of books, but bookstores are an important local cultural institution who should be supported since, as writers, they sure support us. Now, speaking of important local cultural institutions, some of you might be aware that I've I'm embroiled in a bit of a dispute with our friends at the Hamilton Public Library. Now, this is because the book I'm reading from tonight, The Medusa Deep, came out in June, and shortly afterwards, I looked in the Hamilton Public Library catalog and it wasn't there. So, like everyone in the book trade, libraries order new books well in advance of publication. So they had the new Stephen King on order for 40 copies, John Sandford, 45 copies. I could check all this stuff, the new Matthew McConaughey memoir, which the literary community is poised to read. They had 52 copies on order, none of The Medusa Deep, which is a young adult novel based on an award-winning previous novel aimed at getting young people in Hamilton reading and also making it the center of a very peculiar universe. They had none of those on order. So I contacted them and I asked them really politely, as nicely as I'm talking to you folks now, just why this was happening. And it turns out the library doesn't really work the way you think it does. Like so many institutions, they've switched over to a new software-based, more efficient ordering system. As with so many of these systems, it's designed in the United States. So they're a little bit like, say a new hip hamburger shop opens on James Street, looks good, has a cool name, but actually it gets everything on its menu from McDonald's because it's faster and easier that way. So if local farmers and suppliers go to this restaurant and try to sell them their stuff, they can simply say, well, it's not up to us. You have to go to the head office in Chicago. It turns out that's how the library is operating too. So when I asked them why they weren't ordering a young adult novel from a respected local publisher, this is what they told me, that they kind of just get everything through this software from this wholesaler. Anyway, I ended up publishing an opinion piece in the Hamilton Spectator about that. And occasionally I was able to talk to the order people at the library, which so far has resulted, I can proudly say, in no results whatsoever in them changing their policies. Although Noelle, my publisher at Woolsack and Wynne, tells me they have started ordering from her since I started talking to them. So these things can be done. But I've been talking to more people about that. Howard White at Douglas and McIntyre and Harbor on the West Coast. Various people, Heritage Canada. It turns out this problem is endemic. Like so many institutions, they are just switching to software, and the people who you think they're supporting, they're actually shafting. So the whole thing's still a little bit up in the air. Libraries, it turns out, are sort of the last bastion of colonialism. So if you're a local writer, you might think for a moment that perhaps you'll get your attention from your local library, but just look at this event tonight. We're all here in our bedrooms or kitchen tables or home offices celebrating and creating a local culture. We are creating, folks, a local culture at this moment. And the people who order books for our library are sitting on their couches watching the Disney Channel, and Tuesday they'll be back at work shaping their collections accordingly. So we've really got to check in with them more than we've been doing. Now, my understanding is that with the shape the book trade is in at the moment, taking into account not just the pandemic, but a lot of other factors, for Canadian writers and publishers, getting proactive with our local public libraries is not really a question of principle. It's a matter of survival. So folks, we've got to get it on. Okay, that is my editorial that I'm starting my reading with. Thank you. I'll actually read from the book. I hope I've timed everything properly. I know LitLive can be merciless if you go over. So bear with me a second here. Oh, and there's a link to my spec piece if anyone wants to read it. Now, so this happened some years ago. Noel Allen of Woolsack and Wynn put out a call for books based in Hamilton. So I said, I don't really know anything about Hamilton, so I tend to write about things I know about. Oh, hang on a sec. So that's why I've written books about jazz and chainsaws. So I said to Noel, I'll write you a horror novel. So what I did was I started, it was a bit of a lark. You just think, hey, I can do that. And so I ended up, since we live 2 blocks away from what was Ivor Wynn Stadium, is now Tim Hortons Field, I said, well, we'll have, and so Noel said, okay, well, make your protagonist a teenager and we've got a deal, so I can sell it to the young adult market. So I did that, and I had my protagonist living in my house right here, 2 blocks away from the stadium, hearing strange sounds at night coming out of the stadium. So I wrote The Midnight Games, a horror novel based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft. So I had the Cthulhu mythos being invoked at the stadium. And it was sort of fairly well liked, The Midnight Games, and won the Carey Schooley Award at the Hamilton Book Awards. So Lovecraft is a figure in the book himself for various reasons. And novels can be hard to read from, but there is a self-contained chapter, which is a little bit of a flashback. It's interesting as a book turns into a series. It's all really narrated in the voice of my protagonist, Nate. So you're writing page after page, thousands and thousands of words. I'm going to make these books into a trilogy, and I figure by the time I finish, I will have written the equivalent of Moby Dick. So it ends up sort of accumulating over time. So I've started including flashbacks in a sort of third-person narrative voice, not only to supply the tremendous amount of exposition you've got to inject into a work like this at certain points, but to vary the voice a little bit. So Lovecraft, who died of bowel cancer in a sanatorium in Providence, Rhode Island in 1937, is actually a character in this book, which takes place in 2012. So how can that work? Well, it is a science fiction horror novel, so we figure out ways. Here's so there's a lot of elements in it. There's an airship from 1937, which appears in the narrative and also turns out to be a factor in rescuing Lovecraft from the sanatorium and taking him someplace where his condition, which is much worse than bowel cancer, if you can imagine such a thing, can be cured. So I've got this flashback chapter that is sort of works a little bit as a short story in itself. So this takes place on the last night of Lovecraft in the sanatorium in Providence. Visitors often showed up around this time, late in the day, when darkness had settled over the Jane Brown Memorial Hospital, when dutiful adults who, for one reason or another, did not really want to visit their parents in the terminal ward came to the terminal ward to visit their parents, knowing they'd soon be asked to leave. So when the last visitor, keep your eye on the clock, you've got 20 minutes, closed the door on his way into the ward, the night nurse and the orderly weren't surprised. What an oddball, said the orderly, who should have been doing laundry or rinsing bedpans, not hanging around the front desk. He came by earlier, the nurse said, with a whole passel of oddballs. I teased Howard afterwards. I told him he must be quite the writer, since here in his illness, characters out of his storybooks are coming to see him. He told me he didn't really write books, the orderly said, just short stories. I got him to autograph an old magazine for me, Weird Tales. One way or another, the nurse continued, they say truth is stranger than fiction, and these were quite the bunch. Some stuck-up foreigner with an accent, a girl right out of Africa with gold-rimmed glasses and a great crown of black hair, some awful-looking tramp wearing a coat like a pup tent, and then this feller who's, I swear to God, a genuine Red Indian. Well, they must be good buddies, the orderly said. Only old ladies ever come to see Howard. They shook their heads. They knew H.P. Lovecraft wouldn't be with them much longer. He told me the most awful story, the nurse continued. This Indian? No, Howard, just yesterday. It seems that when he was little, his mama always told him he was so ugly. Even when he was only 6 or 7, he would sneak out of the house at night without his mother or his aunts knowing, and walk the streets and explore the old town. He'd hide in the shadows when anyone came. He thought he was so ugly that if they saw him, they'd be scared. He lives over on College Street, but his family lived for years on Angel, in the nicer part at first, though later they had some setbacks. He told me that on these night walks, he liked to go to Prospect Park, but one night, something was there in the park, waiting. Bullies, the orderly nodded. Worse yet, a bunch of perverts. Damn them anyway. They should round them all up. And I told you, this is the most awful story. Howard says that crouching in the shadows of the big statue, there were things waiting for him. And these things, they scooped him up. Perverts, the orderly said. I knew it. And took him into the darkest bushes, the nurse continued. And they, mind you, this is what they told me, they planted something in him. I'll bet they did, the orderly smirked. It was late, and the nurse was used to these conversations with the orderly. If you didn't find a job you could send him off to do, he'd keep talking, and what he talked about would get more and more dark and morbid and creepy. But there was something about Lovecraft's story that had really got to her. The way the poor man had told it, it had touched something inside, given her a chill, so she ignored the orderly's drivel. This thing, this seed, he says, it's been growing in him all his life, and now it's ready to hatch. He insists that we cremate him. He says it's for safety, for the safety of everybody. He wants to be cremated. Well, that's for the family to decide, isn't it? When they make the arrangements. The nurse shuddered. That's what's so eerie. He wants to be cremated now. If we wait, it might be too late. But who were these characters? It was a long time ago, eh? You could never track them down and press charges, not now. Howard says they weren't human, the nurse continued. I tell you, the way you describe them, you wouldn't get me near Prospect Park at night, not with a 10-foot pole. Well, what kind of creatures, said the orderly, like boogeyman or... Howard says they weren't human. He still has nightmares about them. He's terrified that when this thing hatches, whether he's dead or alive, they'll come back and rip it out of his belly and claim it for themselves and take it away and raise it for their own, and then... Anyway, the name he has for them is night gaunts. They sat in silence. Then the nurse pointed to the clock. The orderly headed for the door. If I ain't back in 5 minutes, send a posse. He snickered. Night gaunts. He opened the door of the terminal ward, but the nurse noticed that when he went inside, he left it open. Night had fallen outside the ward's barred windows. In the grip of delirium, despair, and opium, patients occasionally made a break for it. The long, clammy room, smelling of sweat and sickness was full of whispers. There were no visitors tonight besides Lovecraft's friend, but in the terminal ward people lowered their voices as if afraid to awaken and goad into rage the death that slumbered and yawned and waited there. The squeak of bed springs, the moans of patients too sick to speak, and there was Lovecraft's cot. A benefactor had just donated new curtains to circle each bed, heavy linens patterned in the Art Deco style, all bold lines and bright colors. Around Lovecraft's cot, the curtain was drawn. The orderly approached. Last call, gents, he announced. He drew back the curtain. Time to... The cot was empty, and so was a chair beside it. The blankets had been thrown aside. Lovecraft's robe and slippers were gone, as was his tiny stack of books. The old man in the next bed looked up with wide, astonished eyes, and raised a shaking arm to point at the windows. The orderly felt a draft of cold air. The window shouldn't be open. The orderly went to close it and saw that the bars were gone from the outside. Ragged splinters of wood and paint lined the frame, and he could see the outline of the heavy iron grid against the grass below. He looked up. In the night sky, something like a cloud crossed the darkness, a vapor that distorted the stars and then spread out and away. Beyond the tidy lawn, the line of trees waved as in a winter gale, and the orderly heard a tremendous hum, like the engines of the night itself, swelling and fading into the sky. He went back to the old man. "Where's Howard?" he asked. "Your neighbor there. Where the hell did he go?" "Something ripped off the bars," the old man gasped. "Something like a big octopus. Pulled them off like they was stuck up there with thumbtacks." The orderly sighed. Half the people in this place had lost their marbles and they weren't ever getting them back. He repeated his question. "Where'd he go? And the guy who was with him?" "Up the rope ladder." The old man pointed to the ceiling. He fell back on the bed. "I'm telling you, it had the arms with the big suckers, an octopus, and that Indian feller. They took Howie up the rope ladder. It was a rope ladder to the moon." Okay, thank you.
Thank you, David. We're going to keep things going here. Next up, we have Carol Steski. Carol Harvey Steski's debut poetry collection, Rump and Flank, launched in September 2021 with New West Press. Her poems have appeared in the Poetry Anthology, Another Dysfunctional Cancer Poem Anthology, and literary magazines, including the Thames Review, forthcoming, Carousel, Free Fall, Room, Untethered, Prairie Fire, and Contemporary Verse 2. She won the first place in Free Fall's 2019 poetry contest, judged by none other than Gary Barwin, and was nominated for the Pushcart Prize. Her work has also been featured in Winnipeg Transit's Poetry in Motion initiative. Carol grew up in Treaty 1 territory, Winnipeg. She now lives in Toronto with her husband, daughter, and crazy French bulldog. She works in corporate communications. Please welcome to LitLive, Carol Steski.
Hello. I'm so glad I had my microphone unmuted because that was a little joke backstage. I want to just start by thanking LitLive for having me here today. When I saw the list of readers for tonight, I was just like completely gobsmacked, like what a stellar lineup, plus me. So, but I'm going to work on my imposter syndrome in the new year. But I'm really thrilled to be here. So yes, my debut poetry collection came out just a few months ago. It has been a delightful whirlwind amidst this crazy pandemic. I'll just tell you a little bit about Rump and Flank. It focuses on bodies, the many incarnations of the body, humans, plants, animals, chemical, and what happens to bodies, what they go through, what they endure, and how they respond. And there's a particular emphasis on the female body and female experiences. Some of my some of my work touches on some dark subject matter, but there is also an eclectic mix of some pop culture. There's The Wizard of Oz makes an appearance. We've got some Sesame Street Muppets, Toronto Raptors. I have a poem about the Toronto Raptors in there, and frogs, and which I'll be reading one of those tonight, and oysters and shark teeth and all kinds of crazy stuff. And there's some sex, so I totally encourage you to check it out. I'm first going to read poems from the first section of the book. These are poems about bodies in different stages, elements and stages. There's some nostalgia and childhood, growing up, that sort of thing. And the first poem in the collection where the book gets its name, I should show you the book. This is the book. Show you that. Yes, the first poem is it's about the idea that our patriarchal society likes to carve women up into pieces, and that's how we're judged, by these individual pieces instead of, you know, as a whole entity. So it's called Various Cuts. She is rump and flank. She is side and swivel hip, twirling skirt steak, chop smack and tender in the loins. She is bone in. She is marrow soft and baby back, with lily livered open eyes of brown. She is all ribs, all tongue tips and shoulder blades, and wings made of fascia flayed. Oyster night. You were culled just for me, a plump tongue shucked upon the half shell. A whole note dropped headlong into the bleak song you were born to sing. Your eagerness to please people is legendary. Generations of necks decorated with the byproducts of your chronic irritation, quiet, iridescent despair. And if that weren't enough service, you compel us to covet the salty bodies of neighbors and strangers, or at least flicker interest in our own forward relationships. I don't need a mignonette or hot sauce costume, just your fresh press against me, mouth to mouth, silk muscling silk, with one fell swoop and last gasp relieved, you're swallowed wave after wave back to sea. Mammatus clouds are those amazing bubble-like clouds that form before and sometimes after storms. And mammatus is from the Latin mama, meaning mother, breast, udder. Mammatus clouds. The mammatus clouds bubble and sag. Full breasts pulled south by the weight of mouths, a latched litter of kittens straining all resources. Glands engorged as water balloons hanging from gravity's fists, anticipation building. Or bagged milk, those plastic pouches brimming before the triangle tip is snipped to release the flow. As a girl, I used to hold them in my arms like wobbling babies, cradling a dream. Wait, the letdown is imminent, triggered by infant's instinct. Who knew the strength of their pull? Small tongues muscling the song from the instruments with perfect, urgent embouchure. That voracious art of knowing what lies beyond the flesh to harvest what you need. The next poem is the poem that Gary judged. Sorry. But honestly, him being the judge was like, I don't win contests, but I won this one, and him judging it was just like a total thrill. And his like judge's commentary of it was so creative and so like rich with imagery. I actually thought it was better than my poem. But anyways, here's the poem. Curmudgeon. Half submerged in the algae sluice, like a greasy green egg. Sunny side, greeting the day with a grudge. This bullfrog is thick as a grown man's fist, and Tony Soprano tough. His whole body's an open mouth flipped inside out. All day he waits, self-basting and belching glottal stops uncontested, a drunkard's dream. He lives in a perennial meat sweat, only moves as extreme need arises, and then at a rubber snail's pace, fat elastic band joints and beefy limbs yawning. Even when that ancient urge stirs wet and down below folds, he just lays right back and snaps a band of fingers to summon his infinity from the reeds. And the last few poems are from the last section of my book, which is poems about bodies in struggle, physical and mental health, relationships, and in particular, I explore conditions like cancer and depression, concussion, and experiences unique to the female body, infertility and endometriosis, abortion. The first one I'm going to read in that group is just a caution if anybody, it deals with miscarriage. So if there's anybody who has concern about that, then it might be a good time for a break. So this is based on my own experience after a long infertility journey. The treatment worked, so I was pregnant, but it started as twins, and by the third ultrasound, baby B had no heartbeat. So in the case of twins, the mother's body actually reabsorbs the fetus, and so it's not like a typical miscarriage. So I was in a very strange position of, my body needing to nurture one baby, my the remaining egg in my basket, and simultaneously disposing of another. And I just found that to be a very, it was difficult to wrap my head around that, and not to mention obviously the fear of what's going to happen to baby A. She's fine. She's 15. It all worked out. But this is called Miscarry, Baby B. Interrupted in your tracks. Auto shut down. Glottal stop. I don't have to eat you by mouth to hide your scented evidence from predators. Nature spared us that. I prepare a pillow for your budded skull on my comfortable lap of lymph and blood. Wait for nap time to absorb your frozen beats and bars, your paused parts. A mother's unconscious job, the way a scavenger is programmed to pick with surgical precision a fallen body clean. But my work comes with a sky full of love and too much grief to name. This soft labor complete, the extinguished smoke of you is burned like a woodcut on my amygdala, hollow relief. So it goes. The body, a fracked landscape, fraught with probable catastrophe. Cue the reboot, jump starts my faltering heart. And this next one is called Weaning Off Antidepressant Early Days, which is really self-explanatory, but I just want to tell people that although many people are probably going on to antidepressants right now, and I actually have as well during the pandemic, but if you do happen to want to wean yourself off of them, please do so with the guidance of your doctor. And this is why. Weaning off antidepressants, early days. Someone call the fuzz. A conundrum is coming down, down, has landed. Rolling brownouts. Intermittent fizz of lights like cigarette drags. Electrical surges fry brain meat in its pot of bone. Nerves are scalped. Even shadows cause the skinned chicken. Muscles screech. And when the head turns, the eyes take 3 seconds to catch up, like a live TV sensor delay, but in real time. The body sweats its full weight into the sheets. Relieved of a lifeline, borders become frayed. Rulebook abandoned. The mind has no idea, no plan for how to behave. Nostalgic for the doldrum days. And the last one I'm going to read is called Mercury Bomb, which is about basically being a kid in the 70s, early 80s, and being allowed to play with poison all day. And then you wonder what the consequences are, then when they may show up. When will the shoe drop? That sort of thing. Mercury Bomb. Bored. My sister and I once cracked a glass thermometer in half. Watched its blood ball burst and the quicksilver spill out the shaft, shimmering and cleaving into reproductions of itself. Like funhouse mirrors giving birth and exiting a clown car. For hours we watched this uncommitted straddler of states shatter and shape shift as it pinballed across the headboard. As it slinky, the staircase we made with our hands dropping down, 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 like the Tin Man's tears. What cellular chaos was spawned that day in our toxic play while the eyes in the back of our mother's head expired? DNA rearranged into 70s plaid or permanently edited fingerprints? What chemical aftermath, decades in the making, might someday trigger little missiles to multiply, rippling and glittering like jumping fish in our autumn river veins? These days, I feel fine, though compelled to regular checkups, so I slip the cool, slim rod under my tongue and wait for that bloodshot to rise. Thank you. That's all.
Thanks so much, Carol.
Thank you.
We're going to have one more reader before we take a brief intermission, and that is Ralph Benmergui. When Ralph Benmergui sent out into the world his spiritual memoir, I Thought He Was Dead, he was more surprised than anyone to be a published author. Ralph, as some of you may know, has spent many years as a host and interviewer, first at the CBC for over 20 years, then at Jazz FM, and as a documentary producer and now podcaster. He joins us tonight, hoping to overcome his sense of imposter syndrome and to hear others share their writings. Currently, Ralph is working in politics, with the Provincial Green Party as they head towards another provincial election. He is also hosting his podcast, Not That Kind of Rabbi, and another for the Canadian Jewish News, CJN.ca digital magazine titled Yehupetzville. He lives in Hamilton with his wife and is father to 4 boys, a dog, and 3 cats. Please welcome to LitLive, Ralph Benmergui.
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate that. I haven't timed myself out, so I'll see what happens. Thank you for having me, by the way. It's a real honor, and I really appreciate it. So this is my book. I Thought He Was Dead. We'll win. And without Noelle Allen, it wouldn't have happened. I went to her and said, look, I write for broadcast. I write to speak. Like a comma is not where it's supposed to be. It's where I need it to be for a pause. And she said, don't worry about it. We'll take care of the heavy lifting. You just write the book. And then she really helped me put it in the right kind of order. So I really appreciated it. And working locally was very important to me. I didn't want to get lost in the machine, as it were, of the larger publisher at that point, but it's been really fun. So the chapters are short, but this one's called Tuesday is Seniors Discount Day. One of the fears we confront as we age is that of decrepitude. In a world that commodifies existence, we struggle to conceal any reduction in our utility. The weak do not produce. They become a burden to society and family. This commodification, endemic to a Western capitalist society, has precursors. The use of the word taxpayer is our introduction to this way of thinking. It's taxpayers' money. Hell, it's my money. We've all heard that before. As a matter of fact, when I advise politicians on communications, I demand that they take taxpayer out of their speeches. What I object to in the constant use of this language in public discourse is the sheer selfishness of it. As we claw away at the public good, at our ability to care for and about each other, we are left with the naked and material walling up of our lives. Private cars, homes, malls, communities. If we are merely taxpayers, then we're positioned as customers who demand but are often unwilling to pay for the services that keep us safe and alive. We become customers who have but one article of faith, our right to service. We demand better daycare, but only if we have small children, better acute care hospitals, but only as we get older, and as our closest family members need one. We've forgotten to see ourselves as citizens. If taxpayers have rights, citizens have more. They have duties, rights, and obligations. Are we obligated to each other? Do we step beyond our specific material lives to bend a knee toward each other? And as my Sabbath visitor said earlier, show that we are willing to engage in the spiritual task of walking each other home? Something has been profoundly attacked in this shrunken view of our lives. In my journey, it appears to be no small coincidence that our spiral into self-interest hit full acceleration when we decided that God was dead. There, I said the word, the one that triggers so many thoughts and feelings, the G word. So for the sake of clarity, I'd like to tell you about the God that I don't believe in. That God is a man with a beard sitting in a very nice chair. In his hand and weighing on your conscience is a naughty and nice list. The pediatric version of this divine is also known by another name, Santa God. In fact, this is the God that most of us now leave behind as we enter adolescence, never to engage with it again. It is said that we can choose to worship one God in many worlds or many gods in one. We have as a culture, I believe, chosen the latter. And what small gods do we bow to? The latest movie star spewed out by the Hollywood hit-making machine, or an expensive shoemaker, or a fashion designer, or someone who can kick a ball very hard while wearing shorts with an ad splattered across their jersey. These people will, for a brief time, actually become immortal. Now imagine the distance between that small slice of idolization and what we see when we gaze through the Hubble Space Telescope at the literally millions of galaxies in constant and awe-inspiring flux. Imagine what it is to see God not as a thing, a noun, but a process, an unfolding, never-ceasing pulse of creation that animates every cell in our bodies, and indeed every granular flake of stardust that we are, in the end, made of. I often think of the life of stars. When they die and go supernova, the resulting enormous explosion forces nearby gases to come together and give birth to a new star. Life, death, birth. The cosmos is alive in ways we can't even imagine, and we are but a fantastic cellular spark in that majestic flow. A priest named Matthew Fox was excommunicated from the Catholic Church in the early 1990s for saying that the church had devolved into Jesusology, the worship not of Christ consciousness, but of the man, of Jesus. He argued that the faithful needed to reorient themselves back to a state of awe and wonder for creation itself. He calls it creation spirituality, and his teachings have allowed me to see spirituality through a deeply ecumenical lens. There is in most religious talk a not so subtle undertone of exclusion, a tribal vibe. I'll elaborate. At a workshop I conducted recently at a local synagogue, we were talking about the value proposition of being Jewish. What was in it for these people to identify as Jewish? At one point, the dreaded chosen people label reared its misunderstood head. Some take the assignation as a sign of superiority, that as Jews we've been singled out in some sort of divine lineup by the man behind the two-way mirror. Him, he's the one. Weary but resigned to our fate, we must now serve a life sentence as beacons of light unto the world. I addressed the woman who brought the issue to the group. Perhaps, I offered, we can look at this in a different way. You see, I identify with those who say that God's not Jewish. We're Jewish. She went quiet for a moment, appearing confused by what I just said. But he is, she finally said. We moved on. But 2 weeks later, she came back to the group and said that she hadn't been able to stop thinking about what I'd said. I challenged a fundamental belief in her, a definition of chosen people that she, as a convert to Judaism, had taken great comfort in. What Fox and others have taught me is that there are many wells that lead to the one river. Spirituality is an exercise in profound intimacy with others, with yourself, and with the mystery that swirls around us and literally through the ever-living universe. Being Jewish speaks to my particular need to make sense of all this. I identify as both progressive and a religious person long before I was beset by heart disease and cancer. There was just one element missing. Death was for me no different than it is for most of us in this highly material and secular culture. A terrifying and downright rude assault on my march to forever. What I was beginning to realize is that I had assumed I was just going to skip right over the growing older part. Like death, decrepitude was for my 100-year-old grandmother or my liver-spotted aunt. I was better than all that. I'd recovered from angina and radiation. I was free to run back into the land of making money. A year and a half earlier, I'd been in a very different place. I was unhappy about my professional life, but personally rising to the challenge of starting a new second family. I'd been through many struggles, divorce and the pain that brought to my older children, as well as a grueling work schedule. Up at 4:30 to host a radio show, working on one of 17 documentary programs, and advising the fledgling Green Party on top of it all. Though through this all, a new and lovely ritual had emerged. With the first of my younger boys came a gift I've since come to cherish, the Sabbath. I'd been working on a documentary series we called 5 Seekers, and we were shooting out in Cortes Island, British Columbia, the home of the Hollyhock Retreat. The point of the series was to witness and facilitate 5 seekers who had given up on religion but still found themselves spiritually wanting. One of the experiences we arranged for them was a visit with a woman on the island who every Friday night hosted an open Sabbath dinner. Friday night is, of course, when Jews celebrate the arrival of Sabbath, Shabbat in Hebrew. In fact, it is the welcoming of the feminine divine, the Shekhinah. What was interesting about this particular Sabbath is that this woman hosting was not Jewish. In fact, her home was a celebration of all spiritual paths. Walking around her living room was like moving through the stations of the cross, except at each station you were greeted by a different religious icon. Here was Buddha, next Ganesh from the Hindu faith, then Jesus, and so on. She was specific in her choice of when to celebrate, but deeply ecumenical in her choice of who would accompany her on the spiritual road. The dinner was light and the company was enjoyable. But what I didn't realize at the time was that it would plant a seed in me that I would bring back to my home. I mentioned the dinner to my wife when I returned home, and though she was raised in a secular home, she agreed that we should start having similar Sabbath dinners at our house. Anyone was welcome. Some who attended we knew well, others barely at all, and once in a while people would bring friends we'd never even met. The structure was simple. We spent time and wine with everyone flowing from the kitchen to the living room. Eventually, we would all move to the dinner table, and I'd give a brief explanation of what the rituals of Sabbath signified. I often referred to the writings of Abraham Joshua Heschel, whose book, The Sabbath, is concise, poetic, and deeply resonant. He speaks of the notion that Jews create an architecture of faith that is fundamentally based not on brick and mortar. We are, after all, a deeply diasporic people, always moving from one land to another, but in time. There are 6 days when we are humans doing, and only one where we are humans being. Sabbath is a time of reflection and connection, if we so choose. For the Orthodox, the strictures on work and labors of the home are severe. For most others, the observance diminishes to the point where for many, the Sabbath is indistinguishable from any other day. But imagine for a moment a world where we massively reduce our use of energy for a day. We keep a few lights on, but give up running errands or scrolling on our phones. Maybe we take walks instead, or just spend the day connecting to each other and ourselves. I remember clearly when governments began promoting Sunday shopping. I had been disappointed. I thought of all those people who would now have to work weekends, all those people who, without restraint, would now be shopping every day, all the time. There was no more day of rest. Shabbat is the greatest gift that the Jewish people have offered to the world. What a waste to toss it aside. At our table, we light candles and then ask that everyone do a blessing. In this extemporaneous and often touching moment, I've seen husbands turn to wives and bless them for the love they bring, even though the chaos of child rearing or the pressures of their jobs have been heavy. We have heard people bless their ailing parents or recently passed and much beloved pets. There's something in the public proclamation of gratitude and in making sacred what would otherwise simply pass us by that transforms the feast every time. This is different from a casual dinner party with its bursts of small talk about this or that new TV show. Instead, dinner is a point of connection. For a moment, we're stripped of the need to impress or entertain each other and can instead speak of things that matter, both to us and to each other. You see, what Sabbath brings, what heart disease brings, what even cancer offers, is the deep knowledge that this is not a rehearsal. Life is not something that happens just as soon as we get these other bits out of the way. The day-to-day chore that doesn't quite satisfy, the daily routine of breakfast, lunch, and what's for dinner. Life is only this moment, here, now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. What a lovely note to take us out into the intermission. We will be back in about 10 minutes with our next 3 readers. We'll see you soon.
The silent idea dreamt it was more than a fisherman's coat. At best, it was a pocket without clothes. It knew nothing about fish or water, nets, or love. So, no wonder.
I'm going to play a couple other things. That was idea by Sasha Archer, and now I'm going to play. This is a video. The video was created by Hamilton artist and performance artist and filmmaker Simon Frank, and actually I did the music and the text. It's called Frank's Tree Service. Gather round and lend ears, for let's hear the truly foremost story of Frank's Tree Service. Oh, Frank's Tree Service serves tree trunks for free. Frank's Tree Service is the foremost tree service for trees. Frank's Tree Service is the foremost tree service for forests. Frank's Tree Service arrives in a Frank's Tree Service truck. And so the Frank's Tree Service technician arrives on the scene in Frank's Tree Service overalls and says, "We're experts in the field because nothing beats Frank's Tree Service overall or overalls. And lend ears and gather round, for nothing makes us happy because nothing is like trees." Imagine how it feels when the sky is dark and you're the first star. That's Frank's trusty tree service. You're the first tree. You're reborn. You're a tree and you're reborn as a tree. And soon you'll be surrounded by a forest of trees, reborn in a forest, reborn and filled with trees. If a tree falls in the forest, oh, that's good, because it means there's a forest. But if a tree falls in the forest, that's not so good, because it means Frank's Tree Service isn't there. If a tree falls in the forest and makes no sound, it's falling the wrong way. But don't worry, for if it makes no sound, we at Frank's Tree Service still hear it. Rise up, trees of the forest. Rise up into the waiting hands of a Frank's Tree Service trained and certified tree technician. We're technicians of trees, magicians of the forest, chipper alchemists of wood. Imagine how much wood a wood chipper would chip if a wood chipper had nothing but ungovernable hope and the unbridled ability to make forests like we create pulp fiction. Frank's Tree Service serves trunks for free. Trees, rise up. We write the rise of the forest. We write what was fallen, and we make the forests all right, alight with life. They say you can't see the forest for the trees or the lack thereof. They say there are no trees because the forest isn't there, or it's a ghost forest filled with ghost trees. They say the wind is the ghost of leaves, and the ghost leaves shake in the ghost wind as it winds through the ghost forest. The hollow forest is an open mouth formed into the shape of an invisible forest. The wind howls through the invisible forest, ghost forest, forgotten forest, lost forest. They say you can only find a forest if you know where the trees are. They say you can only find a forest if there are trees there, and you can only find the trees if the trees are not lost. They say you can only reverse a forest if you know it needs reversing. They say the opposite of a forest is not nothing, but less than nothing. They say the birds would sing for the forgotten forest if there were any birds left to sing. They say that sometimes the birds have lost their song, or the songs have lost their birds, like leaves falling from forgotten trees or the wind moving through the forgotten branches of lost trees that are there no more. What does a tree think? A tree thinks forest. A forest thinks tree. A tree thinks other trees, and so forests. A forest thinks in forests. And mycorrhiza. Rise up, trees. Rise up, birds. Rise up, lost leaves and forgotten songs. Frank's tree service makes trees rise. We make birds come to life. We make the forest arise. But gather your ears and lean round, for here is a secret of forests. We take what was broken and fix it. We make what was broken and put it back together. We take the parts of the tree and make a tree. We take the trees of the forest and make a forest. We take the branches of the broken heart and make a heart. We take the heart and send blood. We send blood round the forest like sap. We build a forest by fixing our mistakes. Listen, send this through your cell phone towers. Send this to your people's ears. This is foremost. This is foremost in the forest. This is how to build a forest. You build a forest by fixing your mistakes, by fixing the broken, by wearing overalls and walking backwards, by gathering together, by sticking in, by sticking close, by taking the pieces and not letting them remain pieces. You build a forest with trees. You make trees with a forest. You make trees by looking closely at a forest. You make trees by never forgetting the trees.
So lovely. From Catherine Mockler.
On school. It was too hard with you around all the time. You're kicking me out? She didn't say anything. He screamed into the phone and said, "Are you breaking up with me after all these years?" He said a lot of other things too and kept at it until he realized she'd hung up. He put down the phone. Chad sat up from the couch and said, "How'd that go, bud?" Next story. Anne said, "You can start small. Look at this stuff." She gestured at the bookshelf. There's nothing here that had any meaning for Mom, but those are her books. Did you ever know Mom to read anything other than Reader's Digest? These are just for show. Anne pulled a book from the shelf and read, The Classics Library, Don Quixote. Do you really think Mom read this? I mean, she ordered half of these off the TV. Anne sat down in her mom's over puffy armchair and looked at the spines. They were all matched sets arranged by height. One series was on the mysteries of the ancient world. Another one was about the mysteries of the Far East. Another was the mysteries of space. She remembered the commercials that had aired back in the 80s. Yes, so. Great, let's get some boxes. And I'm going to read a short section of my novel. It's set in the same town as the short stories, fictional place called Griffith. It's actually Duncan, BC. I don't know if you guys have ever been there, but I call it Griffith because I like to go home sometimes. So this is from the novel. Casey handed the joint to David, who took a drag and passed it along to Jamie. David flipped around the radio station until he found the classic rock station. Casey said he got his pot from the government store. It was better, scientifically engineered to be more potent. Technology, he said, makes the best weed. Jamie thought it was good, but he liked to get his from a guy he knew who grew it outdoors. Free-range, organic, more natural. You take into your body what they put into the pot, he said. The government weed was all chemical fertilizers. Jamie wanted to smoke nature. David tuned them out. He'd had his fill of pot chit-chat in high school. Pot had always been big business in Griffiths. David's mom would tell him about hippies coming in the 60s. They thought the West Coast was a perfect place for their utopia. The land was cheap and nature everywhere. They started communes in the woods that were really just grow-ops. His mom had known some girls who were drawn into that life. A friend of hers had been arrested with a van full of weed. Her boyfriend had got her to drive it into town because he thought the police would leave a pretty young girl alone. Imagine, his mom would say, when drugs came up and she thought David needed a scare. Throwing your life away like that. David found out years later that the woman who had thrown her life away was the local MLA. Being a pretty young girl hadn't stopped her from getting arrested, but it did stop her from going to jail. And she spun the arrest as activism when she got into politics years later. Bikers came to town and got into the pot business in the late 60s. They were aggressive and armed. There was trouble. Some hippies went into the woods and were never heard from again. So by the 70s, the bikers were the only ones doing any large-scale growing. And the forest industry had some bad years in the 80s. The bikers bought up the small contract businesses, the shake cutting, tree stripping, tree planting companies. It was a good way for them to launder money, and it gave them legal access to the logging roads that led to their crops. And a lot of people who might otherwise have ended up unemployed kept working. People had jobs, the companies stayed locally owned, and some of the bikers turned out to be good employers too. Decent wages and benefits and everything. No one seemed to mind working for them either. The old owners were crooks too, everyone said. Bikers moved most of their operations indoor in the early 2000s. Grow ops were more reliable and you didn't need to have some guy camping out in the woods to watch the crops. When pot was legalized, the retired cops the government hired to oversee the distribution hired the old bikers to handle the growing. They already had the infrastructure set up, and that's just the way things work in Griffiths. Which is what Jamie was arguing when David tuned back into the conversation. Jamie said, aside from the quality of the pot, we have a moral obligation to support local business and keep money out of the hands of retired pigs. It's all corrupt, he said. But it's grown locally, Casey said. The government just takes the tax off. The money goes into roads or whatever. Whatever, Jamie said, is more cops and toys for cops. The local pigs just got a tank. It isn't a tank, Casey said. It's an armored truck. They had a picture of it in the paper last week. It's a tank, Jane insisted. It has one of those spinny gun things on top. David said, a turret, and everyone nodded. So that's the novel. It's out in 2023. It doesn't have a name yet. Short story collection is Paul Baring. It's available in stores. You can pick it up at your local indie store. Don't pick it up right now. It's very, very, very dangerous out there. Get an ebook or something. Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks so much, Michael. A lovely sampling of both books. Look forward to the next one. We have one more reader tonight, and last but not least, it's Alice Burdick. Alice Burdick lives in Mahone Bay, Nova Scotia, and is the author of 4 full-length poetry collections, Simple Master, Flutter, Holler, and Book of Short Sentences, as well as one selected, Deportment, The Poetry of Alice Burdick, which came out through Wilfrid Laurier University Press. She has also authored 2 cookbooks, and her essays and poetry have appeared in print and online chapbooks, broadsides, folios, magazines, journals, and anthologies since the early 1990s. She has been a judge for various awards, including the BP Nicol Chapbook Award. She also visits elementary and high school English classes as a poet in your class through Poetry and Voice, Les Voix de la Poésie, and leads workshops through the Writers Federation of Nova Scotia. Please welcome to LitLive, Alice Burdick.
Thank you. It's really excellent to be here in my living room where I often am, but also now I'm with you all in your various locations. I'm very grateful for this. It's fun to see faces. I've been writing, after a year of really not writing a lot, I've suddenly been writing a lot. And it's a great relief because it's one of those things that helps me feel like that I'm living. So that's good. And most of these are essentially poems in conversation with other works or and that includes everything, music and movies and other poems and you name it. So I'm going to start with a really long poem called Brine. Time to shovel the mud into a new day of broken pieces. It's a bitch to dig a ditch. I would enjoy a firmer material. Cured at the market, fish heads go down easy. Cold bubbles tickle my nose. It's good to aim for dreams and smartly evade the invaders. A new life killing rodents at the pickle factory, a delicious, full, sour, crispy life. We start new in different worlds. Maybe that's why I don't want to go to space when the world is so wildly various. I fell full into the brine of ages, of angst, a murky primal mire, basically consciousness. Please let me explain. And yet life begins and ends. No reason, but it happens. Let's address each other with our last names. Scooters are actually fun. Let's crawl right into the future. You must be thirsty due to the brine. Nasty, healthy drinks, unbelievable wealth. Do you want to press my buttons? Cheers to the breath of life. It makes my organs tingle. How do you like all the sounds? Falsetto, outreach, hirsute, and cream-filled. Socks for days, man. Scan the ethical app. ID the whole breath. Exhale the small words, curved mustard, unframed design elements. This is a good way to learn more. Shared images, historical accuracy. Where is all my family? Who were they? What is not discussed is not remembered. Can you pull story from abandoned knowledge? How did people die? From life or from violence? Let's pay our respects and share our pain. I am not religious. I never learned the words. So I pray for the dead and the living only with feeling. A cemetery between overpasses, overdraft of lost space, and aromatic pogrom. Why did a short people be tall? And when did it happen? Pick a color. Throw your punch, excellent fix, sounds bounce through the vortex, microdose the brownstone retrofit. People steal often and smile while thoughtful robots track the proposition. You don't know jack shit about jugulars, jackboots down fevered halls. I will make a newly hip bottling plant with water from the sky and rather angled cartwheels. Artisanal, local, pungent, anachronistic I stink. I include you, scum. Amend to a prevalence of returned vessels. Stretch your calves and kiss the spare corner. Scroll down each smeared counter. Hello, let's try a new venture. Reach out and break the Crocs open, pickle party on the floor. Essence of nature, including skyborne matter. Shut down codes, a glut of free labor. I would like to be considered. Get your beard tucked in, keep it firm and crisp. Bag full of money, axe to the capitalist portal. The whole family gathered together, mainly ghosts, guests welcome. Extra plate for the feast. Get ready for a great love. Memory comes in the form of a frequent hologram. The entry is open to heart eyes. The scariest place is online and invisible. Enjoy the flavor of the spice flames. Tourists conga in the protest line. I'm mystified by the shadow-bound spotlight. What is happening with this whole thing? A hole in our bodies, a thoroughfare for other bodies. Crush violence, tax office, big mic drip. What is controversial about that holy prostitute story? Who is popular beyond 5 minutes? Outdated citizenship, paper burns itself. Oh, please, this paper bag recycles DNA. I will never go back after the sacrifice. I deal well with icicles, although it's not ideal. Do not leave the young old man in the forest. Even over the centuries, we walk and move old rotten limbs to clear passage. Bandage me with your waistcoat. We can go on near cold streams. We can go on in the shadow of tall branches. We've done it running over centuries. Stream P into the stream. People's hardline RE genres are their own tattoos. In fact, it is love, not hate. Do you want me to continue beating back through snowy stones? Free to go, blinking into the time warp. Just be a part of the circle, join in the murmur, and remember your loss. Will you recognize me with this different hairstyle? I will cry because I see our connection. I see with your beat, you feel the blood through our song. My glasses always steam up out in sunshine or the shadow of the holy place. Let's venture into the new time together, bubbles along our skin, tongues and fingers. Welcome back to the new old spot where breath shares a story with nearby birds. That's a long one. This one's called Brush Fire. The crow saws across the reach. A scent of plastic on the brush fire. There's something wonderful in the middle of the road. Fiddling with the entertainment unit, it will lick the sunset in due time. The sound of smoke. I thought I had alpacas, but I had no alpacas, only shadows of soft hats. And this one's called Double Hockey Sticks. Pies and faces, overalls, and a tall glass of cold milk. Flim flam, double hockey sticks. I'd like to work for money. I've got the puppets lined up. Open the door. You can't hide from chandeliers in the giant room. Various profiles in the dance club hearing. You are legit a person, so develop your wild intelligence. Rough double microphones, a spine chill in the broadcast. I celebrate by beginning at the crevice underneath a hot blue sky. Oil limbs the quilted origin story, mission accomplished, up high. Nice try. The overreach invites a cheek slap, AKA journalism. We're talking about talking. Young people with big ideas yell in the big room, where is the military symbolism? I piss on your funding. A statue of violent dishonesty. Do people feel the abstract flashing of peace signs? Memorials rise from the earth to heal wounds. We want to know sorrow feels clouds, a group crying in a mirror. Two more. This is called the demographics of Slamtown. And I only recently started watching Survivor, which I understand has been on for many years. I was surprised by how mean everybody is to each other all the time, but they seem to enjoy it. So they make some money doing it. I guess it's just like any other job. So anyway, yeah. So the demographics of Slamtown. Monetizing occult fears, we give words to the progress of the stars. Have you dealt with a fierce, unessential world? Religious wanderers wreathed in pungent skinny dips. Let's go to the capital and meet the important bastard Tsar. Blood sinks through the tapestry. You deserve an amazing house. This guy thinks his dick is incredibly full of hope, but that's a salad fork talking. Eat cake and feed death the clean plate. Cheers the fun dance party. It gets quite Baroque until we understand we're somewhat human. Cheers to backwash on the study of language. Bloody brainheads tell us the man will go to work on the brewer's neck. It's a special place full of guilt. How about them books in the harassing library? Murderous book club, submit your words and hear ye, hear ye. Allow me a feather on the blotter, bonnet, boners, bona fide torn pieces of paper, joyful magnifying glass on the shadows. You dedicated your life to the fear of a bifurcated longbeard. Your boots are assuredly full of spiders. You better be careful as you lean on the soft and padded walls. I'm so interested in rockets in sepia deserts. I smell a funded projection of spooky magic. Orgasm is an amazing spirit-filled petri dish. Go ahead and wear a white drop cloth. Fire your jets and focus the probes. Sci-fi, cipher, go ahead and meet this hot propulsion. No more clearance until you start a new religion. Okay, sure. Go ahead and flee the open briefcase. Wizards tilt levitating mood lamps, fire extinguisher, lamp, nor'easter. A beautiful shine on the floor, the explosion of small mercury in the outbuilding. I have something to communicate with you. It's the shock of existence. Check, please. My hat is floppy and full of a great something called the breakdown. Keep moving and try 2 devices in a singular dimension. Pretty good invention. It starts with a merry-go-round crayon. Tropical, wall stripes, slice cords, on-site floppy hat. Extend a copy to the dizzy apprentice in the apartment complex. Who can't stop the mix? The beer made a brand new sound. Near bricks falls a wall of breaks. Flash loops turn tables into a kitchen lesson, a soft heap of salt flicks. Assembly of rhythmic engines, cars gear a heavy music. Wheels pull the factory into the future. Get that ice cube out of your ass. With a tight butt, you can conquer the stage. Without sight, a wild song. Let's range voice right out the window. Affinity beyond splayed fringes. Super utopian boss lady trails long nails through space. Just wait 2 days at the conference. Layer the plates for future equality. Let's commence a juicy kiss. Rehearsals make it fantastic. It's not all white in space, so integrate now with gravity. And this is the last poem. And it's called Lightning in October, which is just a couple of months ago. That's January. An open, dark sky. It's night, and a fine time to explore how lives explode. Once a phrase is used, it is used again. Prime time. Not ready for prime time. Ready for prime time. Wheelhouse litigation. A voice caught in amber bounces around the room and shatters on the hard lino. Tell me a story about how people decide to be everything that makes no sense. To destroy as a self-help exercise, a violence that allows no conversation. Feel the shadow of the stop sign fall on the corner near the chickens who know their home. I am now 51, and I am alive, but not promising. All my favorite people are also poor. The light fixture mimics the hanging plant. Arms stiff and outreached as the leaves splay and sprawl. A plaintive mirror. A light translated into life, and light from when shines formed. Thank you, guys.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Alice. This brings us to the end of our readings for the night. I just want to thank our audience for joining us and our readers for reading for us. Like we said, if you haven't already taken the chance to post the link to your book, please do that in the chat. We also have a Facebook group that you can reach people at. It's the LitLive reading series. So feel free to post a link there as well. And at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Gary to lead us through a short Q&A if people have interest.
Thanks, Ben. That was fantastic. Wow. Everybody was really such a great mix. So if you have questions to anybody, for anybody, please put them in the chat, and I can ask them, or you can ask them, or we'll figure it out. Actually, I had a question for Alice and for Michael. One of the things that both of your work does is there's kind of a disjunction. There's a kind of montage of voices, like those really short little stories that you read, Michael. Like they were one little thing right butted against another, and I was thinking that was kind of like Alice has these little phrases kind of drawn from the world, the kind of the flurry of language in the world and how those things work. So maybe if you could maybe both ask about, maybe both talk about how that works, about how that kind of montage works in your mind, about in kind of triangulating the world through that technique, perhaps. So how about you, Michael, first?
Well, when I was, and those are just snippets of much longer stories. When my book launch was coming up, and I had to think about the most entertaining way to read the book out loud. I'm very much like a reading out loud isn't really part of my process of writing. So when it came time to present them to people, I wanted it to be a little more compelling than what I'd written. I thought if I read a long section of a story, people might get bored or something. So I kind of found the most entertaining, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but the best parts of my stories that would get a laugh or get some kind of reaction and could also work as standalone little snippets without me needing to set up each one.
Yeah.
And I just through the collection a few times, highlighted some parts, tried it out on a few friends, and then that kind of became the reading I do for this book.
It's interesting to think of creating a version of your book or of the stories that's a performance version? Is it like the way people might do a medley if a musician, or they might abbreviate things rather than going through the whole thing just like you did. And so it's a really interesting thought that they exist in different ways.
That's exactly how I thought of it. I was partially thinking like, I always joke, it's like those commercials for a K-Tel compilation. They blast through the songs. Maybe you don't want one song, but they play two you like. So you're like, oh, well, I'll order one. So it's kind of it's a sell feature as well.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And Alice, maybe you, I'm presuming that your stories are actually long narrative. I mean, your poems are long narrative poems, and you just took out all the best lines and put them together, right? That's what you did. I know.
Yeah, they're very, actually, yeah. I just made them so confusing, but normally they're like Mary Oliver or something. Like they're, no,
Oh,
I just,
thank goodness.
no, they're just, I don't know. It just, for some reason, that makes the most sense to me. This way that I write now, anyway. Maybe forever it's felt that way. The world is a multifaceted thing, and there is so much information coming in different ways that for some reason when I'm writing, I'm connecting just little things. Maybe it's not feeling like connection to other people always, but that to me it's like it's like a chorus. There's a chorus of voices out there, and I'm trying to put them into a poem.
Absolutely, and but they also the voices and some of the language comes back. So it's like a musical patterning. So I mean, oh, I heard that little motif coming back over here, or that. So it really feels shaped, like you've curated what you're hearing from the world, even if it's very outward facing and open.
Yeah, I for sure. Like there are little triggers or things that twig you when you're writing, and I guess those things just sort of latch on. The world is just full of a lot of sounds and information and feelings and humor and sadness.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, that sums everything up. No, that was great. It was those are so great, those new pieces. I haven't heard them, and they really do exactly that, what you spoke of. It really creates a state. So yeah, so it's so interesting, and so thank you.
Thank you.
And I wanted to also ask a question. There's something about I guess for David, Carol, and Ralph, and maybe this is a strange way of joining you all together, but David, you were talking about the local. You write stories that happen that are triggered by things that happen in Hamilton. The Cthulhu thing happens at Iverwin, or whatever they call it now. It's set. A lot of the things at least start out here, and so thinking about people connecting to the local, and seeing themselves in the story. And I was thinking that, Carol, also about sharing really personal experiences for people to listen into and to see them, I guess. So I'm thinking about seeing themselves in the story you're telling about you and your specific experience, which is, of course, Ralph, also one of the things that you were doing. You're talking about your family and your thoughts and your discoveries, I guess, or your voyage, your path through things. So, I mean, I somehow see that kind of related about how writing presents the writer and the writer's sense of his local experience, or their local experience, and then people listen in and connect to it in different ways. I'm wondering how you each think of that. Maybe David, would you like to start?
I'm just reading Sharon Butala's new book, which is Essays About Aging, and I've always liked Butala. She always writes about not Saskatchewan, not the prairies. She writes about southwest Saskatchewan in the area of East End, the Cypress Hills. That's what it's called. And to me, she covers so much territory just by concentrating on that very small geographical area. Certainly as much as to me, that's very profound when someone sticks to a little area that they know. And of course, every place that we are is the locus of the entire universe. So as soon as you start thinking that someplace else is more important than where you are, you're completely missing the point of where you are. So I think, and Butala, it's an interesting book. Of course, I can't remember the name. And of course, I can't, if you could see my desk, you know why I can't put my hand on it, even though I'm in the middle of reading it. It's called The Strange Visible Air. And I think really talking about the immediate place around us is where any work develops a tremendous amount of power. So anyway, it's a question about the local, right? Yeah, and of course, I guess I'm saying write what you know, which is a little bit of a cliche, but I think the fact is that all our lives are very interesting and have fascinating stuff going on in them. So this is naturally where you're going to start. Poets I admire because they're really good at that. I think better than a lot of fiction writers a lot of the time.
Thanks, David. It makes me think I went to a Sheila Heti reading and she workshop, and she did this thing where she asked everybody questions, and you had to sit down. Everybody stood up and you had to sit down when it didn't apply. And basically any sort of thing that you would think would be interesting to anybody or in their life, and if they had that experience, they had to sit down. And so technically the quote least interesting person in the room was left, and then we had to interview her and then hear what she had to say. And of course she was fantastically interesting once you just listen to somebody and the particulars of their experience. Okay, it's fine, she hadn't been an astronaut and she hadn't won a Nobel Prize and she hadn't been a drug addict and she hadn't whatever, but she was fascinating when you listen to this with that attention. So that's sort of what you're saying about the attention to the local and being centered in what the actual particulars of a life is and of a place. So maybe that's a good place to bring in Carol. Your work was very intensely personal, talking about experiences that you've had, and then we listen, and either to me, things that I haven't experienced, but of course, hearing them through your voice, your own experience, makes it very moving. Can you talk about what it is to share those experiences, and what, as a I guess a technical move as a writer, in terms of how it affects your audience?
Yeah, it takes, I realize now, an enormous amount of courage to kind of distill your experiences into something and then put it out into the world. And a really important part that I don't think I really had appreciated, some of these poems were written a while ago. The publishing process is glacial. It takes quite a while. So some were written quite a while ago, and I don't think I realized at the time just like the value of the act of publishing and putting it out into the world, and just how important connecting with other people who may have gone through these sorts of experiences, just how valuable that was for them, possibly, potentially, but for me too, in terms of healing. Like, I really did not, when I was writing them, it's obviously there's some catharsis there, but I think the real catharsis is in actually publishing them and making them available, into the world. It's just really a a part of the healing journey, I think, that I had underestimated and still on, because doing this during the pandemic was like this extra layer of like, I don't know, they're very obviously very, very personal, and you don't really know, how things are going to be received and whatnot. And it for sure, caused me to go inward much more than normal. So then to like put it all out there, get it out there, I really had to kind of remember and remind myself and lean into this idea of sharing, and this being like a gift to anybody else who may have gone through similar struggles. And what it takes a lot of courage, and the vulnerability that I felt and am still feeling has been like incredible. But just trying to lean into the moment. Like hopefully it's resonating with some folks.
Yeah, no, I'm really, I can see that. And also not only in having written the work, then you also, just like I did, ask you to talk about it. So that's outside of the controlled work that you did, that you then are called on to speak to often these difficult things. I think that's it's a very deep function of art, is to bear witness to your own experience and then to share with people. I who've been there or am going through this thing, I'm now coming to tell you what it's like and what it has been like, and maybe you can connect in some way from that experience. So yeah, I mean, which is a very noble thing. Like it's a noble function of writing. I mean, it honestly is. It sounds, maybe it sounds silly, but I think it's one of the things, like bearing witness to things. Thank you. And so maybe Ralph, if maybe you could speak about your book is also about your ideas and also personal journeys, thinking about things that have happened to you and and kind of places, things you've learned on that journey.
Sure, I'll keep it brief. I know we're wanting to get back to whatever we were doing in
I'll
this,
start nodding off if it goes too long.
this constricted little world we live in now. Well, it was an interesting process, because it's sort of you're cannibalizing yourself, right? You're having to actually mine yourself and your experience in your life. And, after it's all said and done and published and out there, when you sit down to write something else, you just think, well, I just kind of gave away the farm anyway. So I don't know what else, I could cannibalize of myself. So that was interesting. I also been finding it interesting to have some of the feedback, which is that people think what I wrote was very honest. And I said to my wife, maybe it's just us in here, but I figure if you're going to talk about something like this, it's not much fun to just try to present yourself to people so that they can think good things about you. It's better to just be honest. Because over the years, I've interviewed lots of people who've written memoirs that were more of an apologia, about their careers and their life. And you sort of get irritated reading it, because you realize that they didn't come clean. So I don't think I ever thought of it as an option. I just sort of thought, if you're going to do this, do this. And Noelle was really important too, because she just, my third draft, she was like, you're not talking enough about yourself. And I said, I don't really want to talk, like, she meant professional career and stuff. And it was like, I wanted to talk about ideas. And she said, no, you're going to have to talk about your life, because you've been a public person. So I had, sat down and wrote 75,000 more words. But it was a good idea. It was a smart thing to do, because I enjoyed just, mining that and figuring that out. So yeah, I've really I really enjoyed the sort of personalization of it, because I think that's how we connect. That's, this is all we have is we're not alone, and writing can conquer that feeling of separateness. My wife is printing something from downstairs.
Writing is happening even as we speak. There it is. And it's like, yeah, it's like being in the newsroom. No, but it also makes sense, like what you just said about, like you understood something about the memoir, having interviewed many people who have written memoirs. So, and then we know who you are as you present it in the book, as well as being a public figure, just like Carol's talking about being who, identifying who she is, so that she speaks from a particular position, that then we can understand who's talking to us and why they're telling us these things.
Yeah, and if she was just doing, word salad poetic gymnastics, great, I guess. That was cute, but she wasn't. It was her, this was her life, and you knew this was her life, and within everyone's life is everyone else's life.
Yeah.
Right. We all manifest it in some personal way. It's a divine spark. We all have it.
I think big ideas are always within those anecdotes we tell and those stories we tell about something that happened to us, Just about all our stories are allegorical. So I think those personal stories, oh, this happened and this happened, well, in general, there's a lot behind them. So I think sometimes it's a message, it's a matter of sort of winnowing out the stories where those ideas are most embedded.
No, absolutely, and the writer is the one who would notice and remember and value that story. Like Alice is remembering specific things, she's hearing, like constructing these voices that are twigging, and so it's specifically from that perspective, and as well as drawing from your own life. It's always drawing from your own consciousness. I think we better wrap up. However, I would love to keep talking, but I think it's as Ralph said, it's getting late, and so this was really marvelous. It was a spectacular way to begin the new year. So thank you all. I'm going to pass it over to Ben to give the final official goodbye. So, thank you.
There it is. Good night, all. Thank you all for coming and joining us here tonight. I'll see you soon.